It's been a miserable Thanksgiving for dejected Dolphins fans. I am Miami Herald columnist Omar Kelly, and joining me is Barry Jackson, and we are here to heal your wounds, or at least attempt to, following the Dolphins' 30-17 road loss to the Green Bay Packers in a frosty, and Barry, I do mean cold, Green Bay, Wisconsin. I walked to the car, Barry, and I had gloves that only had my fingertips out. Wouldn't you know that my fingertips were frozen just on a 10-minute walk to my vehicle. I can't even imagine what that's like sitting out there for 4 hours, which is why all you did see all game was Dolphins players sitting at the heaters. And I'm in fairness to the Dolphins, the Green Bay Packers were also sitting at the heaters, but it was just a miserable experience and a miserable game from the Miami Dolphins. Do you buy into the theory that they cannot play in the cold, Barry?
I think that factors into it, but I think the bigger issue that we've seen in play is that this team has a ceiling of being able to beat average teams, below average teams, occasionally a good team at home, but they can't do more. So I think what we're seeing is not a result or a byproduct of the cold weather, but of limitations with the roster. And as you and I have talked about repeatedly, how the team was built. It was poorly constructed. You cannot play a dominant physical style of football, which is precisely what you need to play in cold weather. They're just not built to measure up with Baltimore, Pittsburgh, the physical teams in football. You and I know it. Every Dolphins fan knows it. The question is, will Steve Ross acknowledge it and recognize it to the point where he realizes that there have been fundamental flaws in how his front office has constructed this roster, and will he do something about it? To me, it all comes down to that, because it couldn't have been any more clear than last night, where you have a player after the game, Jordan Brooks, saying we're soft, where you have the broadcaster on NBC, Jason Garrett, repeatedly saying that this team is not physical enough. He didn't use the word soft, but he said everything but that. So it's on display for the world to see now. Will the owner recognize it? Are you optimistic that he will, or do you think we're going to continue down this road of speed and finesse for years to come? They'll win 8 games, they'll win 9 games, they'll be a nice, cute little team, but they won't accomplish anything.
Us for a minute while, yeah, you froze all this for a minute while you were spazzing out.
I was ranting during the freeze. I was ranting during the freeze, but nothing is going to change unless they fundamentally change how the roster is built, Omar. Am I overstating it? Am I overreacting, or is it true?
I think that there were some circumstances and variables that factored into the game. Do I agree with you that this is a flawed way that the team was built? Yes. But in fairness to Chris Greer, when he first started this rebuild, the trenches were what he began building. It expired, it left, and then he patched it up with what he could. But are the trenches good enough, strong enough? No, I would argue to you that they are not. However, I do have circumstances and situations that factored in. The loss of Tyus Bowser, the week, that's a starter. That was your edge setting run guy. Quentin Bell replacing him, not ideal. Then you factor in the loss of Anthony Walker, hamstring injury. Replaced by Tyrell Dodson. They missed 20 tackles in that game, according to Next Generation stats. 20 tackles is a lot of tackles. Now, would I factor in it's cold, it's frigid, your extremities are yes, I would factor that into why they missed 20 tackles. But I would argue to you that the trenches, the run game, the disappearance, the vanishing act that the run game has had for the last 4 weeks was also a factor in the loss. It's just not only defensively. And Jordan Love, 3 pressures, no sacks the entire game. Now, that's not good enough. That's not good enough, especially when you flip the coin and you have Tua with 5 sacks and harass the entire game. I watched Tua limp to his press conference and limp out of the locker room. He took a beating yesterday. This is one of the worst beatings that he's taken all season. And everybody who has these fears that, Tua can't be roughed up. Well, that was a damn rough game. And somehow, some way he survived, and not only survived, but he had 114.2 quarterback rating. Barry, I always come up with these reasons why I think after games, I let it sit till the morning and let it stew. Good stew needs some time in the crock pot, Barry. Um, Three reasons in my mind that they lost. Let's start with something that I've been focused on for about a month now, which is the vanishing act that the run game has had, to the point where I believe they're under 3 yards per carry the last month.
Yes, 2.8 over the last 4 games. You had a good column about this earlier this week. They were averaging 2.9 in the previous 3 games, just 2.8 last night, 14 for 39. In the first half last night, they had 6 unproductive runs that gained a total of 1 yard. Most of them lost yardage, obviously. Then they had the one A-Shane 13-yarder. So the question is, has the offensive line been exposed as not being adequate, which we all thought it was pretty good against bad competition? I would say that is the biggest factor. I don't see the holes for A-Shane to run through. Now, you can make the point that Raheem Mostert should play more. You could certainly make the point that Jeff Wilson should play in a game like last night. But I think generally it's been a blocking issue. And that speaks to this fact, Omar. You've gotten by because Rob Jones and Liam Eichenberg have been serviceable. They've been good at times against teams that aren't particularly good. But long term, can you start either or both of those guys and have a dominant run game? They obviously also miss Austin Jackson from a run blocking standpoint. And Teron, who's been a lead all season, had a rare off night last night, allowing his first 2 sacks of the year. So I think we saw last night the offensive line simply is not constructed to win against good teams and tough competition. Is that too bold a conclusion, or have you come to that view as well?
No, it's definitely not too bold a conclusion. I can overlook this for 1 game, maybe 2 games, 3 games. I'm getting concerned. 4, we have a problem. We officially have a problem, and I think the problem is highlighted when you're in that goal-to-go situation. You have 4 downs. You're that close to the end zone. 4th and 1, you cannot punch it in. I'm sorry. Are you telling me that you can't go to an overloaded offensive line, put Patrick Paul in there next to Teron Armstead, next to Robert Jones, and run to your left? Are you telling me that that's not a possibility? And it just goes to the toughness and finesse style that we built this team with, which is fancy. It's pretty. It works. It's like having a Ferrari. But now, when we got to go over the mountain ride, we got to go over the mountain and some hills. Ferrari, it's not doing too well. To me, that 4th and 1 is a major. I get it. Tua is your quarterback. He's an accurate passer. He's a very efficient quarterback. You're telling me you can't hand the ball to Alec Ingold and drive forward and gain 1 yard consistently, and that to me, or give the ball to Jeff Wilson. Somebody has to solve this issue. Somebody has to address this issue. And I just don't know if that person is on this roster. Maybe it's Isaiah Wynn if he gets into the fold as a left guard. I don't know, Barry, but that's problem number 1 for me in terms of the crisis. Then we get to the defense missing 20 tackles. And I get it. I noticed that Calais Campbell was on a snap count restriction, which makes sense to me. He's 38 years old. He just played on Sunday. They took advantage of it primarily when he wasn't in the game. I think losing some of the cornerbacks that compromise your defense. The safety play has not been good all season. But 20 tackles, Barry, 20 tackles. And it was everybody. It was Jalen Ramsey. It was, Poyer. It was everybody. It was absolutely everybody. And I do believe that the cold factored into that.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. It's harder to tackle in the cold from everything the players have told us. But I want to make a couple of points. Losing what they had with David Long last year, and a lot of it obviously was his fault. He didn't play as well. That was very hurtful in a game last night because David Long was their best run defender last year, along with Sealer, obviously, and Christian Wilkins. He was the best run defender among inside linebackers in football last year, if you believe Pro Football Focus. So he would have had value last night. He made a couple plays for the Lions earlier in the day against Chicago. Dotson is simply not as good against the run as David Long was. So that would speak to the point of, should you have kept David Long and simply cut Channing Tindall, who hasn't played a defensive snap all season? So that's one thing. Also, everybody loves Calais, including us. He's been a very good player this year. But for people who say they got Calais at 1/8 the price of Christian Wilkins, they're missing a key point. As you noted, he's on a snap count. Last night, he played 29 of 54 defensive snaps. So you can't say that Calais has stepped into what Wilkins did, because Wilkins was one of the most durable players, had among the most stamina of any defensive lineman in the league. He played nearly all of the defensive snaps. And so obviously you're missing a lot. And I'm not saying they should have paid Christian Wilkins what the Raiders did, but you can't say that they adequately replaced Wilkins simply because Calais Campbell plays only half the game. And obviously nose tackle was not addressed. So there are fundamental flaws defensively. Let's be real about this. I know you got to get to point 3, so we're going to allow you to get to point 3. But if you look at what they need to be a physical team, I don't know where they come up with the money for this or how they make enough good decisions. They need a defensive tackle to play alongside Sealer because Calais might retire. Obviously, he can't play full-time anyway. They need a nose tackle who's a little better than what Raekwon Davis was. And then offensively, at the very least, they need 2 starting guards, right? So that's 4 players, not to mention the money they're going to have to spend to get 2 safeties because Poyer's a free agent, Holland's a free agent, not to mention number 3 receiver has to be addressed. So they have this laundry list of needs and practically no cap space. And I just wonder how all of it's going to get done. But I digress. Go on to point number 3.
You know what? I wanted to address that. One, I think Malik Washington, even though he had that very costly fumble and the team was very encouraging in the locker room afterwards, you know, Tyreek said, you know, hey, young fella, I'm a 5 fumbles in my career. Nobody's even thinking about it, mentioning it. Just go, you know, keep pushing ahead, keep doing what you're doing. I do agree with you, Barry, and I know Dolphin fans don't want to think long term. That's our job, our responsibility. But you got no money. You got a lot of holes and no money, and then you're going to have to rob Peter to pay Paul, restructuring all kinds of contracts, shaking down players, extending players, just to get the money to rebuild this team. And all you're doing is pushing that credit card bill down forward even more. But I get it. They're not pulling the plug on this rebuild, and it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Right.
Let's move on to my third point of the reason why I think that they lost this game. Because to me, it really comes down to the trenches. As football always does, it does in December. We can kind of correlate that game as a December game because you had to play December football to actually win it. Tua is sacked 5 times. Jordan Love, no sacks, 3 pressures. Jordan Love has 129.2 passer rating. He is not that good of a quarterback. I'm sorry, but you could not get any pressure on him. Chop finally gets neutralized. You've got nobody else other than Chop, you know, in terms of pressure from the outside. Clearly, you were struggling and hemorrhaging. You can't blitz. You can't cover a tight end in Kraft. 6 catches for 70. No, 6 catches for 78 yards. The one thing I will say on a positive end is, you know, they ran for 114 rushing yards, 4.6 yards per carry. They had 102 of those yards at halftime. So clearly in the second half, you contain them a little. Now, the question that I have is, can what you've got going on in your trenches right now, which is where you need to be playing strong in December, can they be fixed with what is here, Barry?
Probably not. You're going to see this group effective against certain teams. They should do enough probably in the 2 games against the Jets. Maybe they'll do enough against Cleveland unless it's 20 below. But then against the physical teams with San Francisco and obviously going to Houston, and remember they haven't won a road playoff game or a road game against the playoff team since the early stages of the McDaniel era. They've lost their last 12. With those games, you wonder, is this defense good enough? And you might recall going into the season in August, I told you I had 2 concerns. One is that they were going to be gashed against the run, against good running games this season, simply because I didn't think they'd adequately replaced Christian Wilkins or Raekwon Davis. Number 2, I had told you pass rush deeply concerned me about this team, and last night we saw it. Obviously, Robinson had been on a roll for 3 games. He was a non-factor last night. Kamara, I found interesting, Omar, didn't play a defensive snap, so they did not use a 4th natural outside linebacker last night. It was Quentin Bell. It was Chop Robinson. It was Ogba, who hasn't quite been the same since dealing with the biceps injury. Will Bradley Chubb walk through that door and help at some point? Maybe mid to late December, but the Dolphins could be out of it by then. So I think this defense is okay against average competition, but against good teams, I think they've been exposed. Each of the games they played against playoff teams this year, let's look at them quickly. Buffalo, week 2, allowed 31 points, allowed the big play to Cook. Defense was not good last night. The game in Buffalo, Tua played very well. They lost 30-27 on that late long field goal. Defense is not nearly good enough in that game. Seattle currently holds a playoff spot. Gave up 24 points there, weren't particularly effective. And then obviously last night, 30 points as well. So this defense, I think, just is not good enough to beat good teams. I think that's where the most changes are going to have to come this offseason. And so even though I'm really encouraged by what Tua has shown since he's come back, especially last night, especially the game in Buffalo, I think the ceiling for this team is limited because the defense has diminished, not only from the loss of Wilkins and Davis to an extent, but also because they never replaced what David Long gave them against the run, and obviously losing Andrew Van Ginkel. They got neither Van Ginkel nor Shaq Barrett, as it turned out.
Mm-hmm. Let's address this Shaq Barrett situation. And I said this in an earlier podcast we did together. I'm very sensitive to what he's got going on from the standpoint. Grief is not easy. To lose a child, I can't even imagine what my life would be like if I lost my daughter. I'd probably be in a haze for years to come. Maybe lose my love for whatever I'm doing or life. So I'm not going to speak to his retirement. What I can speak to is the coming out of retirement and if I was going to play, I would only play for Tampa. And then caveat to that, it's supposedly, allegedly, this coming out of retirement was for the Eagles or trying to latch on to the Eagles. Do you fault the Dolphins for basically saying, hey, you go stay unretired over there, even though we've got need at defensive end, especially losing Bowser this week, we're not really considering you. Do you fault the Dolphins for the decision that they made?
I don't, for a couple reasons. One, you have no idea what shape he is. He hasn't participated in NFL practice since June, so you don't even know if he'd be able to help you into the last 2 weeks of the season. And the other reason I don't fault him is the way that Barrett handled this. There was absolutely no excuse for him not calling Mike McDaniel directly. McDaniel shouldn't have found out about this through the internet or through media reports. The correct way to handle this would have been Shaq Barrett calling both Mike McDaniel and Chris Greer and being contrite and explaining to both of them, look, I had reasons that were really valid, genuine reasons for retiring in July, but I want to help this team. I love what you're doing down there. Please allow me to be a part of it. But none of that happened. He didn't make the call. So I guess that's why people wondered, did he have some incentives to try to get to another team, even though word was sent strongly to me that he would have played for the Dolphins. So I don't blame the Dolphins for how they handled this. But I do find it interesting that they will not release him to go to another team. I don't blame him for that, but I find it interesting. And also, as Tom Pelissero noted yesterday, when a player retires on a one-year contract, the contract holds to the next year. So the Dolphins own his rights next year. And the question is, what are they going to do with him this offseason? Right? Do they release him? What happens next?
Yeah. I don't know. I want my money back. I want my signing bonus back. I just want my money back.
Should they have brought him back? Because I guess, Omar, the case could be made, obviously, how diminished they are at edge rusher, not knowing if Chubb or Cameron Goods are going to be able to help you this year. Could a case have been made, or do you think they absolutely did the right thing by saying no?
I don't know. I don't know until I hear from Shaq Barrett and what's going on. I don't know. I understand they don't want it right now. They don't want it in their locker room. And it was a distraction. The day the news came out, like, as I said to you, players were like, what is going on? What like, please fill us in. And when that has to happen, it's never a good thing. And I think it could have made a lot of people uncomfortable. You don't know what conditions he's in, but let's not deny the fact that they have desperate need for edge rushing help right now. I mean, it's at a desperation level, Barry. I mean, there's nobody coming off the practice squad to help you with this. Melvin Ingram isn't walking through that door, or maybe he is.
Bruce Irvin. Or
Yeah,
Justin Houston. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, this obviously, if Chris Greer is asked to go into Steve Ross's office, go into the principal's office, and explain the results of this year, you can be sure that number one on the list is going to be Tua, which was his and Mike McDaniel's fault for not having an adequate replacement as far as a Tua injury. Number two on the list is, how could we expect to win when we don't have Bradley Chubb and Jalen Phillips, right? So this is not the defense they envisioned. If they had those two last night, it would have been better, obviously, than what they showed. I still don't know that it would have been enough, but you're right. If you had told me coming into the season that in December games, their edge rushers would be Chop Robinson, Mo Kamara, who didn't get a defensive snap last night, as we said, Quentin Bell, who's Mr. August, all due respect to him, he's a very nice man, right? And Emmanuel Ogbah, who's playing with 1.5 arms because of the biceps injury, I would have said, that's not nearly good enough. Every Dolphins fan would have said that's not nearly good enough. And yet this is where we are in December. Once again, the Dolphins limping down the stretch. They've had particularly bad luck at that position. Now, how about this question? Dolphins fans who say, well, sure, their luck has been bad, but they invested big-time money in a player, Bradley Chubb, who's had a history of knee injuries before the one December 31st last year, and another player, Jalen Phillips, who everyone loves, and we see the upside and we see the talent, but nevertheless, he's had trouble staying healthy. Should they have taken Greg Rousseau instead? You could make the argument. So, in one regard, you can say, yes, they've had bad luck with edge rushers. The 2 stars are not available, but then you could also say, well, they're investing in players who simply haven't routinely been healthy. Now, with Phillips in college, it was the concussions as opposed to physical things. In the NFL, it's been on 2 unfortunate long-term physical things with the Achilles and now the ACL. So how much do you say it's luck with what's happened with defensive personnel? How much is just mismanagement?
I think it's mostly bad luck. Look at Bradley Chubb. Bradley Chubb made it the entire season until the Baltimore game to tear his ACL, and he's working to come back. I do believe that December, there is no harm right now that you open up his window, give him 3 weeks to practice at this point, and see where he is. Same thing with Cameron Good. What do you have to lose?
Both are walking around fine. Again, we're not doctors. We didn't stay at a Holiday Inn Express. Both are walking around fine in the locker room. If that's any gauge of anything.
Yeah.
Right.
I understand the cause for concern and reservation. Mike McDaniel talked of desperation need. You've got 2 athletes who have been working hard trying to get back, to get a clearance. And what is the harm? You're barely practicing right now as it is, because these are December games. I'm sorry. If you don't know Dolphin fans, you'll pretty much be doing walkthroughs, one practice and a walkthrough for the rest of the season. You don't even pay attention to it, because that's just how December football gets played, because every player is battling something and they're on fumes. What is the harm of opening up his window? You've got a 3-week window, and then if he's not ready, you just keep him on IR. But that's just wishful thinking. Maybe somebody from another team's practice squad could come here and rescue you and save your season. I don't know. I don't know, Barry. Could we be falling apart physically like we've done past December games and December seasons? Very well could be. I do want to get your level of concern for Cam Smith and the shoulder injury, not that he's good when he's actually playing, and Kader Kohu, I believe he's injured a back.
Yes.
Where's your level of concern that the secondary is now watered down to the point where Saran Neal has to play?
Yeah, very much so. The one good thing is that McDaniel said that Kendall Fuller's concussion, according to doctors, would likely not keep him out 4 games. He's missed 3. So unless there's been some sort of setback, then you would think he potentially could return against the Jets in 10 days. So that would give you Ramsey and Fuller, and then Kohu if the back heals, or if not, Storm Duck. Certainly. And then you have Ethan Bonner, who's been inactive all year. Vic Fangio saw things in Ethan Bonner that this current coaching staff apparently does not see. And Saran Neal, who's been primarily a special teams player in his career. It's all very unfortunate with Cam Smith, Omar, because you can see the physical gifts. Anthony Weaver was talking last week again about he's long, he's around the ball, and you can't just put a guy like that on the bench without investing more time. He said Cam Smith needs to play. But unfortunately, it's been a combination of the 2 things that often doom high draft picks, which is injuries. And when you do get your chance, you're not very good, right? Going into last night, he had allowed 12 completions and 15 targets and a touchdown against him. Last night, he was beaten on a play, and now he's had 3 significant injuries that have taken him out of action over the course of the last year, including obviously the shoulder
but
last
let's
night.
be real, man. Let's be real about this, Barry.
Going to run out of chances.
Playing ahead of him. Stormduck is playing ahead of him.
Right, Stormduck, an undrafted rookie playing ahead of him. At some point, you're going to run out of chances, and that's my concern with Cam Smith. I don't want to say he's going to be another Noah, because I think you and I see a player with more upside than Noah Igbenogany had. But at some point, they're going to have to move on, not necessarily removing him from the roster. He's probably safe next year, but saying we're not going to keep giving you chances if what we see on the field doesn't measure up to what we need. And if you keep getting hurt.
Yeah, well,
so that's my concern with Cam Smith. And one thing that's so hurtful from a cap standpoint, we've made this point before. I made it in my column today. If you simply had been able to get quality, cheap labor from the defenders that you drafted, Cam Smith and Channing Tindall, then you wouldn't be in this mess of needing to address 10 positions in free agency that clearly need upgrading. So that keeps killing them as well.
Absolutely. Wrote a column about that, which I don't think Dolphin fans paid enough attention to. When you have a 35% retention rate, not success rate, just retention rate, where everybody else who's good in the league is at 50% or better, you've got a problem, and it steamrolls down into your cap situation. And Barry, the season is not over. I don't want to sit here and woe is me, crying into our sad Dolphins pillow. They still have playoff aspirations. They still have playoff hopes. As Teron Armstead said yesterday, we got back to being that undisciplined team, and we got to clean it up and get back to what we were doing before we came here and basically pooped the bed. Do you still view them as a possibility to make that AFC wildcard spot?
Yes, I'm going to quickly tell you why. There is a path if you win out because of the difficulty of Denver's remaining schedule and because of the fact they will own the tiebreaker with the Broncos if both teams finish with the same record. So let's say Miami's able to win out, which is not inconceivable. It's not likely, but it's not inconceivable. All it then would take would be Denver losing twice, and Denver still has to go to the Chargers. They've got to go to Cincinnati. They have a home game against Kansas City, which may or may not be meaningful in the finale, depending on whether Buffalo is still in line for the number 1 seed in the first round bye. So you could see a pathway where if the Dolphins win out, you could easily see Denver losing 2 of those games. They also have a game against Cleveland on Monday night, and then they play the Colts as well. So Denver's schedule's not easy. The other possibility, and I would not list overtaking Baltimore as a possibility, and the Chargers would be a long shot, but the Pittsburgh scenario, as crazy as it seems, because Pittsburgh has 4 fewer losses than the Dolphins, they're 8-3, while Miami is 5-7. Keep this in mind. Miami wins a tiebreaker with Pittsburgh if those teams finish tied, and Pittsburgh's schedule is really tough, Omar. At Cincy, home to Cleveland, at Philly, at Baltimore, home to KC, home to Cincinnati. So if Pittsburgh loses 4 of those games, you could easily see them losing at Cincy, at Philly, losing at Baltimore, losing at home to Kansas City, and the Dolphins win out, then Miami would overtake Pittsburgh for playoff berth. So absolutely, if the Dolphins win out and get to 10 wins, well, I would think it's likely they make the postseason. The question is, can they win in Houston? At least there won't be inclement conditions in the Dome. Can they beat San Francisco at home? And can they win in Cleveland? And can they take care of business against the Jets? It's a lot of questions. It's a lot of ifs. Am I being too hopeful?
No, you're not, Barry. I think a lot of that was going to come down to injuries and how guys are performing and how the replacements perform. I've always said this. A football team is only as good as its weakest link. And when you put your weak links out there with your backups and your backups can't hold water, that's ultimately going to dictate your course of direction. But we will be here documenting the final 5 games of the Dolphins 2024 season. Are they playoff worthy? Are they tough enough? Can they win in the cold, Barry? I shake my head no. We will see. We're here, Dolphins in Depth. We're here. We will be back Monday, maybe? Yeah,
sure,
Monday.
Why not?
Yes, Monday, as we get prepared for hosting the New York Jets. On that note, Omar Kelly, Barry Jackson, we will see you on Monday.